It's been 6 months since October 7th, and we are still in the midst of one of the deadliest aggressions of the 21st century. It's been 75 years since 1948, since the occupation, since the mass murders and displacement, since the stealing of our land. In just 6 months, tens of thousands of Palestinians have been murdered by the Israeli government, and over 2 million Palestinians internally displaced and targeted by that same genocidal system. Tonight, I welcome you to Words of Palestine, an evening of centering Palestinian voices during this time of deliberate censorship and erasure. My name is Liwa Zinati, and I am the curator of public programming at the Arab American National Museum here in Dearborn, Michigan. Our event, Words for Palestine, aims to honor our dead, to speak against this preventable catastrophe, and to honor life and the living, who bear the responsibility of telling their truth. As Edward Said once wrote, على كل فلسطيني أن يروي قصته, which means every Palestinian bears the responsibility of telling their story. And during our Words for Palestine series, we are doing exactly that. We are also continuing our efforts to raise funds for PCRF and Palestine Legal ever since we hosted our first Words for Palestine online reading back in December 2023. As we all know, PCRF stands for Palestine Children's Relief Fund and provides crucial humanitarian aid in Gaza. And Palestine Legal is dedicated to protecting the civil and constitutional rights of anyone and everyone who speaks out for Palestinian freedom in the United States. So please do take a moment. As you can see the QR codes up on the corner of the screen, please take a moment to screen the QR codes and donate to one or both when you can. Before we begin tonight's program, I'd like to ground us with an acknowledgement that the Arab American National Museum sits on Anishinaabe land and resides within the region with the highest concentration of Arab Americans in the nation. We also acknowledge our neighboring city, Detroit, as Anishinaabe territory and as being the largest majority Black city in the nation with a long legacy of African diasporic contributions. Together, we work to uplift and honor our Indigenous and diasporic communities. I'd also like to acknowledge that Words for Palestine came about as an effort by a generous group of writers, artists, and poets. Leila Halabi, Ali Al-Yunus, Lisa Suhair Majaj, Diana Abu Jaber, Suzanne Muaddi Darraj, Leila Farah, and Ghassan Zainuddin, who insisted upon highlighting our voices and raising the much-needed funds. And since then, we at the museum, alongside our Words for Palestine partners, Mizna, Rawi, and Palestine Rights, have continued this conversation. Tonight, I am honored to welcome poets Deema Shehabi, mejdulene Shomali, and Lena Khalaf Tuffaha. Mabruk, Lena, for your new book, Something About Living, that was just published by the University of Akron Press. This collection actually was selected by the 2022 Akron Prize, and it's now available in bookstores near you. Lena, I know that on your social media you said that it's hard to celebrate your new book, but that there's always gratitude. And I just want to say that we are grateful for your work and for the work of Deema and Mejdulene, and we celebrate your victories as ours, no matter how small we think they are. Again, I want to thank our readers for tonight, for attending, and I want to ask our audience, if you do have any questions, to please feel free to send them in the chat. And hopefully we'll have time, a few minutes at the end, to kind of talk to our readers and ask any questions of our participants. So without further ado, I'd like to begin by introducing our first poet and writer, Deema Shehabi. Hello, Deema.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Deema Shehabi is a Palestinian-American poet, writer, and editor. Deema is the author of 13 Departures from the Moon and co-editor with Beau Beausoleil of Al-Mutanabbi Street Starts Here, for which she received a Northern California Book Award. She's also co-author of Diaspo Renga with Marlon Hacker and winner of the Nazim Hikmat Poetry Competition in 2018. Deema's work has appeared widely in literary magazines and anthologies, and her work has been nominated for the Pushcart Prize several times. For more info, please visit her website, deemakshehabi.com. Welcome, Deema. We are so glad to have you.
Thank you so much to Liwa Zinati and the Arab American National Museum for organizing this important event. I'm honored to read with my Palestinian sisters, where our humanity does not need any explanation. More than ever, it's important that the voices of Palestinians are elevated and heard. And more than ever, it's important that we insist on showing the beauty of Palestinians away from the quicklime of necropolitics and the politics of death and destruction. I want to reassert that I am a firm believer in the temporality of time, and what's happening today in Palestine is both an affirmation of the knowledge that had been passed down to us by our elders who experienced the Nakba, and yet it reaches past our elders and imparts a certain knowledge from our ancestors who were indigenous and existed on Palestinian earth for millennia prior to this moment. So let's always insist on the dignity, beauty, and longevity of our people. I'd like to begin with a ghazal called Gaza Ghazal. On his unearthed chest, she lays 3 time-brazed ghazals. History on repeat, she mourns like Al-Khansa, broken and splayed by ghazals. Brown-eyed girl, wounded child with no surviving family, shakes on camera, silencing her domestic rhythms and overplayed ghazals. There's no room on the train for dark-skinned refugees. Pundits sing for a white Europe free of humane ghazals. On the phone, Shadab says, I believe. Beneath the rubble, a child sees an angel's oiled light opening a gateway for ghazals. She retaliates for her neighbor's insult. Rudeness can only be handled one way, by practitioners of émigré ghazals. It's now or never, he sings, as the bombs fall on Gaza. From a sunlit room, his deep cigarette voice beats all plaintive ghazals. Like this far mosque, you're always there for me. What name do we give it, this rain light we bend for weighted ghazals? November, Indian summer warmth lulls the poet to sleep, but she wakes to a war wind stir, parched leaves, crimson paper ghazals. I'm going to move on to a series of poems which sort of investigate daughters as being placeholders for their mothers. And this is a series of sonnets called the Sun Theater Sonnets. It starts with an epitaph by Agha Shahid Ali, who says, "For whose world is not in ruins, whose?" You wrote me from a bed where you'd see the mountains' alders corral the sky. Who'll empty my last pocket when I'm gone? Once sitting with you on a fountain's edge, I unpinned the debris in my pocket into the basin where you had unfingered rose petals, their outline fading into our bleating desires, the still. When you passed, they transferred a ring from your small hand to mine, and I rested my lips in your mouth's smallest pocket. Oh, mother, I tore your letter and hurled my body to the sun-long corridor. Your skin was desolation. Come, hovering angel. Come, hovering angel. Desolation leaves me gray, chain smoking by a quaking aspen tree who moans a throaty sea song when the wind bristles through its taut ribcage. I'm your daughter, holding a place, panting on a roadway where you leave me no sun to pass through. In a morning dream, I dwarf you, removing a seashore from your face. Then your lips move and you wave your hand. God Almighty, you say, your eyes sewn tightly, though you drag your thick desert voice over zoysia grass, exhuming miniature yellow butterflies and displacing them to a thicket of dusk after the wet. To a thicket of dusk after the wet you pray, don't leave me Don't let me leave this earth broken-willed, O coiler of sorrows, O lost root. Eyes like forest trees, you breathe it in whole, while the mountain pelts you with clouds, semen-scented chestnut tree blossoms, Edelweiss. 30 years before, you trailed a messy son to your father's small tomb in Gaza, salt in your nostrils as the lemon light bound your eyes to the orchard's gray marrow. Decades later, your daughter averts her gaze from the limb-mined earth while her lover says, breathe. The soil coos and rallies her waters. For whose unlucky dead are at peace? Whose? For whose unlucky dead are at peace? Whose? Karantina, every seaside city juts a neighborhood where it's illegal sell jujube in the streets. Love disguises itself to feed you mangoes, apricots. Afternoons, pigeons thicketed the sun while we ambled underneath rusty green shutters. Do you remember how easily we held hands, how the sky was full of twigs when our skin touched? To open this hour is all, you'd say. At the corner store, we hemmed our skirts, donning heels for long embroidered dresses. The seamstress swears she saw you as you were, a field misting the pond, a bent country. This next poem is another ghazal that, again, ghazals use rhyme and refrain to, they employ these things for the listener's pleasure. And the sun seems to make a remarkable appearance in most of my poems these days. Must be some kind of battle against, forces of darkness these days. Ghazal, the sun. Secondhand wrinkles on forehead, she applies kuhl in the sun. Eyebrows frown, but then a reprieve. Ah, the sun. Ceasefire. Gaza's children pour into the school courtyard and ask, will they, can they bomb the sun? My skin's leafy pattern, your mouth conjuring vain as we trudge along date palms in the sun. Inside my chest, you are still sown, Palestine, like seedlings of tiny watermelons, soon to become mother balms in the sun. Fretting in the cell where she has to give birth, Anhar angles her womb towards a ray small of sun. There's a whole house here, he says, little of it my creation, toys, food, and then there's me, flailing in the arms of sun. A global vaccine war, a nationalist agenda, whose flesh mirrors violence, which other befalls empire's harm in the sun. I'd like to read one more kind of longish poem for my Gazan uncle. His name is Lahid. And this poem employs a series of vignettes, memories of time spent with him or of times that others have spent with him. Lahid. The mu'adhin gripped the minaret's head and dipped it into the sea. Water in the submerged prayer's voice rushed ahead. A voice like water reached the cemetery deep within the city. They didn't believe he crushed a girl's ribs with just one hug. They didn't believe he crushed her ribs in an orchard full of pines. She forbade the children to shout his name across the house walls. Instead, whisper it to the grapevine where salt in its veins will mix with tears cried over him and strangle the gardener's nose. He pricked her with a poem for his dead mother, then composed a wedding song for the newlyweds and stitched it across the sky between the moon balcony and pink jasmine, between Jerusalem and Gaza, between the olive and lemon. I want to break this house with sobs, he said. Each sob for a lost sister, each sister a blossom from the vine of Ladybank's rose. Heat from the sea's sun condensed the sweat on his forehead, which fell into a poppy that grew out of a rock as seen by a tourist from Norway. Her head on his chest, next to a bubbling fountain on a Sunday in a garden in Damascus, his voice muffled the faint cries of the tortured in the wind. Faith can't be measured by how far an eye can see, he said to her once as she wiped mascara from her eyelids. She said to his son as he walked along the pier, I was selling sardines at the fish market with my 10 children, and he gave me a box full of lemons, oranges, and grapefruit from a heavenly orchard. How could you allow a womb full of adjectives to break off from my body, she whispered as they swung low on a hammock in autumn. Thank you.
Thank you, Deema. Thank you so much for sharing your words. I love your ghazals. George Abraham in the comments is saying Deema is one of my favorite practitioners of the ghazal alive, and I couldn't agree more.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I would like to welcome our next reader, mejdulene Shomali. Mejdulene Bernard Shomali is a queer Palestinian poet and associate professor in gender, women's, and sexuality studies at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. Her first book, Between Banat, Queer Arab Critique and Transnational Arab Archives, was published by Duke University Press in 2023. Her chapbook, Agriculture of Grief, Prayers for My Father's Dementia, is forthcoming from Finishing Line Press in August 2024. So again, mabruk to you as well, Majdaleen, because you have a chapbook coming up. Again, another victory for all of us. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you to the museum and to Rua for having me, and to Jacob and the other folks behind the scenes who are organizing this. I really appreciate your time. I'm going to start my time by saying the thing that I say at every talk I give, which is glory to our martyrs and power to the Palestinian resistance. I think that the targeting of Palestinian poets and writers and creators of culture is a clear indication of how powerful our words and our invocations of ourselves are. So I am grateful to be in a space where we are honoring that. The first poem I'm going to read is called Baba's Song. When I was 2, my Baba broke his shoulder, so he took a vacation from 16-hour days on the store floor, and we flew to the bled, just me and my dad, in a yellow taxi cab from the airport in Amman. I was so cold in the back seat and Baba in front. He covered me with the first thing he could find, a nightgown from our suitcase. At my uncle's house, I dance and sing in a red dress with white dots, and my hair is curt around my tiny face. I didn't get fat until I was 8, and everyone just loves this girl who can sing all the folk songs. I am Baba's girl through and through, so much that I won't sleep unless he is near me. At 29, I sit at the table with my Baba and we sing Sakkar Ma'mal Sukkar, my jam when I was 2, and we sing with accompaniment, crackling grill and cackling sisters and careening kids. My mother laughing at old jokes on land stolen to be an Israeli army camp in the outskirts of Beit Sahur, and we can still see the watchtower looming over Area C, but tonight C is for cover me, which I do when Baba gets cold at our shughrab. And alhamdulillah, now he's in the next room sleeping, because outside our love, I cannot rest. I don't know how other folks are feeling. I've had a lot of trouble writing new work in the past few months. I feel very dry. So I'm going to share with you a poem from a few years ago that I actually wrote the year that Trump took office, the first time, because we know it's coming again. I keep waking up in America, Right now, I'm eating an egg sandwich my baby made. She fluffs the yolks with sour cream, sprinkles the scramble with chives. She layers sausage on a brioche bun and brings it to my desk where I sink into the internet and consume crises. If complaining were my job, I'd get promoted. I sip coffee and swallow everything without tasting. Right now, the cats are sleeping on my bed. The dog, too. They are only peaceful when they are sleeping. The interspecies conflict is nothing to compare to how the cats spar with one another. I'm telling you about my cats because I think hating cats is sexist, and I am so tired of hearing about dogs and men. Right now, my sisters are at work. A nonprofit director, a chemist, an editor walk into a refugee camp, a lab, an office. My brother climbs poles for AT&T, but I still can't get free Wi-Fi. My father goes to physical therapy. Sometimes a therapist tries to assess his mental faculties. This means she asks him banal questions like, "What is the year?" My mother wishes it was 1974, but knows it's not. Right now, my ancestors are dead and my progeny are imaginary. Right now, I am the future they never imagined. Right now, I can't imagine a future. Right now, my cousins can't come to this country. Right now, my countries are soaked in blood. Right now, the sun is shining and the breeze is gentle. Right now is passing into right after. Right before the end, I try beginning. Um, My dad died last October, October 2022, I guess it would have been. The 1 year anniversary of his death fell on the day that they bombed Al Shifa the first time. Um, and I have found the process of watching folks bury their parents and their fathers and watch fathers burying their children particularly acute. Um, like I'm losing my father, burying him over and over again. Um, so this is a poem that's very specifically about my dad. What makes the oil boil? In Arabish, the letter B is a joke. Everywhere we blaze it. Tongue freshly foreign, fresh off the boat. B as in perfect, B as in Palestine, B as in Balad, B as in Bernard. Before his death, Baba makes you promise you will become his poet, with every day unfulfilled, like a bristo mounting pressure, boiling, bursting, bruising. Your grief comes like this, erupting, seeping, spilling. B as in proud of you, Baba, B as in burial, B as in bereaved. What will I become when my father dies? A ghost, a grief, a lost, a sorrow, a crow, a sparrow. B as in balash, B as in bes, خلاص, بكفي. B as in breathe, B as in please. Yeah, so this is what I'm about to read is one of the few things that I have written since the genocide began in October. Um, I've lived most of my life sort of suspended between Palestine and here. I moved back and forth a lot when I was a kid, and we spent summers there if we weren't living there. And so this is a little bit about that process of constant movement and the kind of experience of living in the diaspora. Meditations on safety. It is 2023 and you are screaming into the pillows while bombs drop at home. There is no metaphor here. Two bodies apart, two worlds. You cannot touch them, cannot reach beyond the grip of grief, and you cannot make it stop. You cannot make it stop. It is 1993 and you go home. You remember watching CNN with Baba, asking him why the Palestinians were so dirty. You leave America soon after. you are supposed to stay. Bet Sahur is quiet. You barely remember the checkpoints, the curfew, the searches, the border, the thick throat. Instead, you remember the boy, the best friend, the teacher's ruler burning your palms when slap, slap, you cannot come to the answer you spent all night memorizing. You were safe then, all things considered. It is 1997 and you do not recognize yourself in America. You become shy again. You hide your body, bigger and more fragile and more. You hide so well you cannot remember where you left you. At school, a white boy asks, "Did you have cars? Did you ride donkeys?" You do not remember the answer. Were you safe then? In the hallowed halls of American learning, where rich kids had enough money to buy drugs, but not enough sense to see beyond themselves. A military recruiter comes to the high school. You ask Baba if you should join, get college for free. He says, "What will you do when they send you to kill our people?" You live at home. Pell Grants and loans and 2 jobs and Baba's endless back-breaking labor. It is 2003 and you're in college when a white boy in class calls you a dirty Palestinian. Point blank. He says it over and over. No one stops him. You do not stop him. You are on a delayed timer. You don't feel things when they happen. You have an answering machine brain. It will give you the message later. Your heart goes off at random intervals. A light in the house to convince robbers someone is home. Rewind the tape. Please, play it again. What did he say to you, Baba? It is 2013 and it's a wash. You host people in your home, and in 10 years they will stand by idle while your community gets slaughtered. You didn't know it then, but you were the same dirty Palestinian from CNN, from high school, from college, from Gaza, from Hamas, from terrorist, from terror, from God, my God, my God. They bombed a hospital and the bodies are gray with soot. You are safe now, you think, away from the bombs, the guns, the brutal, culled your friend list to its core. Okay, yes, 3 boys shot in Vermont. Okay, yes, that colleague who wants to see you fired. Okay, yes, they are doxing and arresting and prosecuting, and the dirt they have. The dirt isn't even dirt, but watch, they will bury you with it. I'm going to read one last poem, and it's actually not mine. This is a poem by Hiba Abu Nada. She wrote this poem on October 10th of last year, and she was martyred on October 20th at 32. So this is one of the last poems that we have from her, and I have just found it a really important balm over the past few months. It's called I Grant You Refuge, and it's translated by Huda Fakhruddin. I grant you refuge in invocation and prayer. I bless the neighborhood and the minaret to guard them from the rocket, from the moment it is a general's command until it becomes a raid. I grant you and the little ones refuge, the little ones who change the rocket's course before it lands with their smiles. I grant you and the little ones refuge, the little ones now asleep like chicks in a nest. They don't walk in their sleep toward dreams. They know death lurks outside the house. Their mother's tears are now doves following them, trailing behind every coffin. I grant the father refuge, the little one's father who holds the house upright when it tilts after the bombs. He implores the moment of death. Have mercy. Spare me a little while. For their sake, I have learned to love my life. Grant them a death as beautiful as they are. I grant you refuge from hurt and death, refuge in the glory of our siege. Here in the belly of the whale, our streets exalt God with every bomb. They pray for the mosques and the houses. And every time the bombing begins in the north, our supplications rise in the south. I grant you refuge from hurt and suffering. With words of sacred scripture, I shield the oranges from the sting of phosphorus and the shades of cloud from the smog. I grant you refuge in knowing that the dust will clear, and they who fell in love and died together will one day laugh. Thank you.
Thank you, mejdulene. Thank you so much for your words. And Allah yarhamu, your father. I want to say that and offer my condolences to all of us for, losing our families in Palestine just continuously in this moment. And thank you also for bringing the voices of our Palestinian sisters into this room as well, to this reading. I'd like to welcome our third reader, Lena Khalaf Tuffaha. Welcome, welcome.
Thank you.
Lena is a poet, essayist, and translator. She's the author of 3 books of poetry, Water and Salt, winner of the 2018 Washington State Book Award, Khan and Her Sisters, Trio House Press 2023, and Something About Living, winner of the 2022 Akron Poetry Prize. So again, Mabruk. Tuffaha's work has been published or is forthcoming in journals including Michigan Quarterly Review, The Nation, Poetry, and Prairie Schooner. She was the 2022 curator of the translation series Poems from Palestine at the Baffler magazine. She's currently curating a monthly feature on Palestinian writing at Words Without Borders entitled Against Forgetting. It's a very wonderful title, Against Forgetting. Everything we're doing is to keep remembering. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Riwa, and the Arab American National Museum that I really feel is a home for all of us, and to Mizna and Rawi, all of the sponsors who made this reading possible tonight, and to Deema and mejdulene. I'm actually concerned about my ability to read after listening to both of you, your incredible presence and your poems. Thank you for your work. I'm going to start with a poem from Khan and Her Sisters. I imagine I am not the only Palestinian writer with this experience, but one of the strange experiences of this era of genocide has been the way maybe our own work haunts us, the writing we have been doing, the things we have been saying, the truths we have been telling for years, and those who came before us decades. And suddenly now they're in 3D and on our screens, and maybe some people are finding them in a different way. That's a very particular kind of haunting. This poem is entitled, What Happened Next? The timeline is teeming. Nakba unlocks the gates. From our house, my father carried the suitcase and my mother carried my youngest sister. She stopped only twice to nurse her, then days later to bury her beneath a carob tree. Time opens the gate. Another sister was born in the first camp where we took refuge, and some parts of my mother too, though she buried her eyes on the road. A line repeats. The Nakba is teeming with locks. They became what they sought and were never granted. My father dissolved, and my mother fed the mourning doves. She stopped only once to grieve him. Then days later, she walked us past the snipers. Nakba repeats itself. My love grew up in the second camp where we waited. This was the era in which we fought to return. Let the teeming. My love was sent out to sea, and the others, what can I tell you? The earth of the camp was too thin to cover their corpses. We repeat. It always looks the same. Lines of us, walking, carrying smaller parcels, structures folding in on themselves. Repetition is a nakba. An accord rears its head when we meet the necessary measure of rubble. And they took the rest of the men in trucks through the gates. My love has no address to reach us. Nakba petitions time. My mother buried, and before her, my sister, only once, though, if the first burials suffice. Again, this poem was written many years ago and published in a book in before the events of this genocide. So that's the kind of haunting that all Palestinians are enduring, in addition to the genocide itself. We are people who are saddled with many anniversaries, and this past March was one of them. It was the anniversary of the Great March for Return of 2018, when so many Palestinians from Gaza, who, as we know, most of whom are refugees, simply walked to the border and demanded to go home, which is the fundamental plea and truth and core belief that all Palestinians are fighting for. Just that simple ability that every other human being in the world has to go home. And they were met with a kind of violence that, now the world has seen and understands, a particular kind of Israeli violence that is always directed at Palestinians. So this poem is the first poem in my new book, and it's entitled Variations on a Last Chance, and it's dedicated to those marchers from 2018. The fence does not hold. The wire sheds its barbs, softens to silk thread. The snipers run out of bullets. The desert, as it always has, of its own volition, blooms. The snipers are distracted, sexting their girlfriends. The snipers' eyes are blinded by smoke from our burning tires. The snipers wonder if they will ever see the end of us. The fence does not hold. The snipers take a lunch break. The bullets melt in their chambers. The bullets disintegrate when they reach the word press on Yasser's vest. The news finally breaks the stillness around us. The bullets will themselves away from the boy's skull. The boy's sandals sprout wings, and he hovers over the bullet's path. The snipers lose interest in shooting at medics evacuating the wounded. The snipers make eye contact with one of us and see. There are enough saline bags at the hospital. The snipers shoot and miss, and miss, and miss. We outrun the snipers. We bury the dead at the fence, let their roots reach the other side of home. Mejdulene, I was especially moved by what you shared with us about your father, Allah yarhamu. I lost my father too this past summer in July. And so that specific and acute grief of watching people bury, if they are even able to bury their parents, their fathers, has been, yet I understand what you mean by that particular re-traumatization. So this poem is for you and your Baba. It's for my father. And so maybe they're both listening now. In case of emergency. This is how you open the box when I am no longer here. One of these might be the 1967, the year we lost the rest of our country. 1936, the year your grandmother swallowed her gold coins to hide them from the soldiers. This is how you keep yourself safe. Keep parts of yourself in different boxes. Trust no one with everything. 1949, the year my father died. 1979, the year the checkpoint taught you the difference between your name and your passport. 1999, the year the last of our olives were uprooted and the wall obscured Jerusalem. This is how you know it will end. When night falls, the windows of the city become mirrors. A key recalls the shape of its doorway. The stones of this land nestle in young hands. And I think I'll read maybe two more. Let's see. The poem from which the title of the book is taken is a kind of a love letter or a letter of gratitude to the poet, the great American poet, June Jordan. I didn't learn any June Jordan poems in high school in the United States. I'd never heard of June Jordan when I was in school, and I sort of accidentally happened upon some of her work at a bookstore when I was in college. And I read this poem where she was talking about Lebanon and Palestinians, and I was just, I still struggle to explain what that meant to me as a Palestinian American woman to be in correspondence suddenly with this powerful, magnificent voice who was deeply committed to my humanity, and what that taught me about what it means to be in solidarity and present, and what it actually might mean to be an artist, to aspire to be an artist. So this is Letter to June Jordan in September. I cannot pass the anniversary of that first news event of childhood without returning to your poem. How from my house I watched, and watched my grief-stricken parents, unable to speak. How I leaned into the screen, the chords of the cries, searching for what was recognizable of fingers and thighs, of bracelets and mustaches. Macabre arrangement of bodies with names like our own. I cannot pass without your words. Something about witnessing twice removed, about distances magnified by the shift into language, of dailiness and my own children's vernacular and the machine, grinding us all in its jaws. I met a girl from the camp at a reading in Beirut. She asked if we could talk about the life of poetry. Our families are hauled off to the world of the dead, and every day it is on screen. In Gaza, we're watching Ferguson, and in Atlanta, we're watching Jerusalem, watching Minneapolis, watching. Their weapons and their training programs indistinguishable. The word almost flickers for a nanosecond. Here, I note the shelf life of self-censorship, legacy of our era. Some days, poems are scrawled on pieces of cardboard and carried on our shoulders at the protest like martyrs. Here, I should say something about hope. Here, I should say something about living. And I'll close with a poem that I sort of thought of as a little bit diagnostic when I wrote it, but I have come to think of it as a kind of prayer. To be self-evident, after Edward Said. Every empire tells its subjects a story of revelation. The trees let down their aging leaves, listless in late drought. The children thrive on filtration. their classroom air and their selfies sanitized. Every empire seems invincible as its borders submerge, its manicured hillsides incinerate between guaranteed next day deliveries. Every empire eulogizes its value system, splurges for pyrotechnics, decorates its mausoleums for the holidays. Every empire turns against its colonies, cradling the embassy's crystal in bubble wrap, packing extra treats for the dogs on the evacuation flight home. Every empire promises a revolution against itself. The children are tasked with designing the future, growing walls of hydroponic greens, rebranding old protest anthems. Every empire denies the iceberg it crashes into, hires a chorus, funds the arts. Every empire sings itself a lullaby. Thank you.
Wow, wow, wow. Thank you. My heart. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much for sharing your moving truths, for everything that you've shared about your father, your families, our families. Whew. There's so much dimension to your work, Lena. So thank you for sharing your work with us. I want to open it up to the audience to ask questions of our readers if they would like to. And there's just so much to sit with, so much to share and teach. And I don't know, maybe I'll start with a question for you, and maybe it's something we always think about. Speaking of empire, from your last poem, Lena. As writers and artists, what can we do more in the face of this insane imperial propaganda and this deranged propaganda that we're facing that just keeps shifting and changing? What can we do? What can we do? Please feel free to tell me your thoughts. We always feel like we're not doing enough, and I'm actually find myself having conversations with cultural institution heads who still want to discuss whether or not we are witnessing a genocide, and I find it mind-blowing to have that conversation still till today. So the propaganda is strong.
I mean, I think, go ahead, mejdulene. Somebody was speaking. Oh, okay. I think the first thing is just to get in the way of the narrative. That's like the minimum, right? Constantly throwing yourself in the way of the fake narrative and bringing up, and also amplifying Palestinian voices, especially those that don't have venues. Especially, like, I loved what mejdulene did by reading Hiba's work. I mean, these are really wonderful, important things to do. I think it's also important to see the solidarity that's happening. I think there is a shift from the past 10 years, but it is kind of a bittersweet solidarity because it's at the expense of the flesh that's at the expense of our people. So that really upsets me. So yeah, there's solidarity, but people are dying and paying a heavy price for it. That's all I can say at this moment.
And after what? Like, we've been saying this over and over and over again for decades, and there's a shift. Yeah, it's good, but we feel frustrated. Like, after what and to what price, for sure, as you said.
And there's also the sense of that centers of power in this country, right? Centers of I really believe that they're so immune to that solidarity as well. They're immune to it because they're also very much aligned with settler colonial politics. This country is based on settler colonialism. So we have to understand the history too.
For sure.
So those values the centers of power are aligned with those values of taking land and never giving land back.
This may be small given the magnitude of the horror and the urgency. And it's nothing. It's nowhere near enough. And it's also necessary, I believe. Every day I feel like there's a battle at the granular level for language.
Mhm.
And, if we're stuck here and that's all we can do, fine, let us fight that battle when people are literally barely able to survive. So an example of that today, and by many well-intentioned allies, but I just feel like the kind of alertness we all have to have 29 hours a day is so extreme and so heightened. Like I'm tired of the word ceasefire. This is my personal obsession today. I don't know. Like I just reached some sort of, I can't, what the premise, that whole concept was like the floor of expectations 6 months ago.
Yeah.
So my patience with that word as some sort of brave ask is zero. And I want to forcefully and lovingly say that and say, what's the thing that you're hesitating to say? That's probably where the power is. Say that. And it tends to have a letter P at the beginning of it, and it tends to be preceded by the word free. And so generally when in doubt, I think we can at minimum constantly urge that phrase back into the language, because I am always amazed at the number of ways it has disappeared. And even in the safest spaces or spaces that are supposed to be safe, right? Like it's always like just a little too much. And so that's do the thing that's too much. Say the thing that's too much. This is the hour. Like there should be no more compromise ever. And language ends up being language ends up making who we are in a lot of ways. So you just hope whoever's watching or listening thinks about that tonight.
I would only, I think that Lena and Deema really covered it. That I would just add that a lot of times we imagine that our actions are not significant because they happen on a small scale. And I think every interruption accumulates over time. And so I would urge people to not take for granted having a conversation with the person at the checkout or your colleague or, the person who happens to be next to you at whatever event you're at, right? I just think that all of these conversations accumulate and shift the tide, as we have been seeing the tide shift. And to sort of recognize that every small thing is actually quite meaningful in this kind of battle.
I like that. An interruption for sure. Every small interruption is big and it builds up. Yes. Thank you again. I think we have a few more minutes. I just want to say that we have viewers tuning in from everywhere, from Dearborn, from Florida, from New Haven, Philadelphia. So there's a lot of love in the chat, a lot of appreciation. Thank you so much. And I also want to invite our viewers to also, again, if you can, to scan the code for PCRF and Palestine Legal and donate to one or both. And to also tune in. Our next series will be on May 8th. And we are continuing to center Palestinian voices. This is what we are doing, and to raise funds as well. And I can't thank you enough for your time, Deema, Lena, mejdulene, and for all the work that you're doing. I just want to make sure we haven't missed anybody, but there's so much love, so much love. Thank you for tuning in, everybody. And this will be recorded and available for everybody to watch again and share with others. So I'm going to wish everybody a good night, and Lena, good travels, and my heart is with you.